Rutgers Rant. I'm joined, as always, by Keith Sargent, James Cratch. Fellas, never thought this day would come. We have a roster. It's like a national holiday, and if fans have forgotten,
Isn't it a national holiday? It is a national holiday.
Well, it is a national holiday, yes. But it used to be Columbus Day, and then they tried to turn it into Indigenous People Day, and now it's National Roster Day for Rutgers. It's very exciting. It's on the calendar. Look it up. In case you forgot what a roster is, it's a list of names with positions and heights and weights, hometowns, and there are 123 players on the Rutgers roster, more than we expected. Not a lot of news, Cratch, but there was a pretty big surprise on there, and it's a huge development, right?
It's a big one. Loomer, who obviously he declared for the NFL draft in January. Some people asked me, people never understood why he did it. He's older, so it was one of those things where he felt it was kind of now or never. But then obviously the pandemic hits. His pro day gets canceled. They did the best. He worked at a Test Football Academy in Martinsville. They did. They had their pro day there, but he obviously goes undrafted, goes unsigned, and in hindsight, back in June, Michael Turk, the Arizona State punter, same sort of situation, signed with an agent, went through the pre-draft process, actually kicked at the scouting combine right before the pandemic hit, went undrafted, went unsigned. He was given his eligibility back by the NCAA. It was kind of an unprecedented situation. And today we learn, it sounds like Loomer, once that happened, thought, I'd like to go back to Rutgers. Obviously, this NFL thing did not work out and all the circumstances that kind of impacted him. So they filed a similar waiver. They got it cleared. So he's back. And look, he was the best pass rusher Rutgers had the last two seasons. And that's not necessarily saying a whole lot because Rutgers has been so bad at rushing the passer in recent seasons. But he's a guy who's got an ability, and now he's going to be put with, Jim Panagos, a defensive line coach. It's developed a lot of guys like him. So it's a big pickup for Rutgers. Right. Not really a transfer in per se, but just an unexpected surprise to add to the roster.
And Sarge, you figure that when you take a guy like him with his pass rushing ability, an aggressive coach like Greg Schiano, and not to mention the fact that now, this defensive line is going to have, far more depth and talent. So, offenses can't just, key in on him as the only guy who can get to the passer. That's a huge deal.
Absolutely. And that was one of the things that we talked about in the summer. That could be one of the question marks. I think we might have talked about on an earlier podcast about defensive line depth. When you have a guy as accomplished as Loomer is, that really alleviates a lot of issues. We assume that Mike Tverdoff is going to start on the other edge, mm-hmm. And beyond that, I think there's some depth, maybe a little question mark on the interior line, but for the most part, I think one of the bigger question marks was alleviated today.
Yeah, and I'm prepared now to say that that defensive line could be and probably is going to be the most improved position on this team. Now, the flip side of that coin is the offensive line, and the roster had a bit of bad news in that Mike Lonsdorf has opted to opt out of the COVID season. We didn't have him penciled in, Crash, as a starter, but certainly he's a guy who would have been in some sort of rotation and maybe could have been a starter. Are we looking at this season now where this whole thing might be derailed by the fact that they can't build an offensive line? Is that where we're headed here, you think?
I think there's a good chance. Obviously, Lonsdorf is a guy who, if he wasn't going to start, and he started at 8 games at left tackle last year, he started at guard in the past. If he wasn't going to start, he probably was going to be the first guy off the bench, given his versatility and the fact he can play guard and tackle. I think there's a very good chance that this does derail them because we knew coming in that Greg Schiano and his staff had to rebuild. The Big Ten is a line of scrimmage conference. They had to rebuild the offensive line, had to rebuild the defensive line. They have done a tremendous job bringing in defensive linemen, but there's a trade-off. When you bring in a dozen new defensive linemen, I think now when you count Loomer, that means you don't necessarily get to bring in as many offensive linemen. There are several offensive linemen in this coming 2021 class committed, so help is on the way. But this year, in year one, especially now that your best offensive lineman is the starting center at Missouri and just helped beat the reigning national champion out in the Midwest, you might be in a situation where you don't have a lot of depth, not now, especially now that Lonsdorf's out, you might be playing a lot of young guys. It could get pretty ugly on this offensive line.
Yeah, you're talking about Maietti obviously out in Mizzou beating LSU. It's the second straight year where an offensive lineman has gone from the Rutgers program to another program in a powerhouse situation. Sarge, what's your take? I mean, is this position group as big a concern as it certainly looks like on paper?
Well, keep in mind, we haven't gotten a ton of all the practices have been closed, so we can't really lay eyes on the pressing issues of the day, which is offensive line and quarterback and some of the other positions that we're uncertain on. However, I'll speak for Cratch. I know he has pretty good sources. We've both heard that the offensive line has been struggling, so far midway through preseason camp. I don't think it's a big surprise. I mean, you look at the depth. I mean, I think on paper, we've been talking about this since the summer. I mean, we saw that Brendan Bordner was moved from the defensive line to the offensive line. He's a guy who I know Greg Schiano knew from when he was in Ohio. I would expect that Bordner has a really good chance to start. You don't move a guy this late in his career from defensive line to offensive line if that's not going to be the case. Nick Freeman is another guy who Greg Schiano said some positive things about today during the conference call. So I would imagine that he's probably your one certain guy to pencil in as your starter. But beyond that, there's just a ton of questions with this offensive line.
All right, a lot of other roster tidbits. We had one guy we thought might be in the quarterback mix, Payton Powell, listed as a DB. Another guy who we thought should switch positions, Johnny Langan, still listed as a quarterback. Cratch, break it down for me. What other surprises, what other things jumped off the page today for you when you looked at it?
Well, I think the big one is Powell. I always expected he was going to end up there at, in a defensive, secondary, just because while I understand that, initially he was going to get a chance to play quarterback during spring ball before that got wiped out. When you add Vedral and you have Sikowski and you have Langan, you have three quarterbacks who've started Big Ten games. And for a guy that, left Baylor because they didn't want him to play quarterback, and it never seemed like Rutgers was terribly enthused about the idea of him being a quarterback when he committed here, it just makes sense that you'd go to the secondary place where they've got a lot of depth issues too. Because, especially at safety, we don't know. It sounds like he might be working at corner right now, but with his size, you've lost Barrow, you've lost T.J. Robinson, you've lost other guys in that secondary. You're going to need to add depth at safety and at cornerback. Other than that, I mean, I will be honest, this roster was about what we expected. Don't know if we needed 10 months to hammer out all these changes, but nothing was, really jumped off the page. I think quietly Owen Bowles, who was kind of like a backup, center in the past few years, he's not on the roster. I think that's of note just because we assume C.J. Hansen is going to start at center. There's not much depth behind him. So I think the especially with Lonsdorf and Bowles not on the roster, I think the odds of a Brian Felter or a Tunde Fatukasi playing as a true freshman have increased. I'm also intrigued to see what they do with Reggie Sutton. He's a guy who was a true freshman year as a blocking tight end. He's played some tackle. He's played some guard. I think he worked at center some his freshman year. A.J. Blazek had him do that in practice. He's a guy who I think could potentially really be a factor in as Greg Schiano talked about, finding that core, the best five guys they can put on the field with that line.
So you've seen a lot of Rutgers rosters over the years. Where does this one shape up? It certainly seems like it's more talented than last year, maybe the last couple of years. That's not saying a lot. I mean, what were your overall impressions?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've talked about just the ability, and we're going to be breaking this down, Cratch and I, over the next couple of days, is how much they flipped the roster. But I think we saw some of the guys who the transfers that Greg Schiano brought in have hit the roster. A guy like Malik Barrow is a guy who I'm intrigued to see. We talked about the defensive line, the interior defensive line. Dwumfor as well is another guy who has a really good chance to start right away. Transfer from Michigan, Barrow from Ohio State. Two guys who I think have Big Ten experience. I think they're going to be able to start probably from day one.
Greg Schiano had a conference call today, his second one in 2 weeks. We're getting some access. Not getting a lot of answers from the head coach, although he's asked a couple of questions, especially about offense and his quarterback situation. The thing that struck me, guys, and correct me if I'm wrong, he seems open to playing either one of those quarterbacks, but they are extremely different players in Sikowski and Vedral. The idea that you can play both of them while running any sort of coherent system, it's unusual. I mean, what is your take, Kratch? Do you think that this is going to be a team that, sees multiple quarterbacks, and even if both those guys stylistically are different players?
Yes, my big takeaway from what Greg Schiano said, and he talked a lot about the quarterbacks, didn't say a whole heck of a lot when you kind of read between the lines, but I did ask him, hey, given, the fact that you haven't had spring ball, that, these guys have never played for you and your staff, that you've had this weird coronavirus season, that everyone gets a free year of eligibility. Would you consider a platoon? Because I think we're going to see a lot of that. Well, we don't really know who the best right guard is, so we're going to play both of them and let it kind of play out during the games. And he didn't say yes, he didn't say no, but the vibe I got was that whoever is the starting quarterback will not have a very long leash, just because Greg talked to how he thought it was important that just because you make a decision at one point doesn't mean you can't change that decision if you feel like that's necessary a week or 2 weeks down the road. So if Noah Vedral is a starting quarterback and he doesn't play well, there's no doubt in my mind that they're going to go to Art Sikowski or they're going to go to Johnny Langan.
You agree, Sarge?
Yes. And Greg Schiano, if you remember his history, right? Go back 2008 season. Mm-hmm. Where Mike Teal, was accomplished quarterback. 2006, obviously was a starting quarterback, and then 2007 had a really, really solid year as well. There were questions whether or not he was going to bench him, and then he took a lot of heat, to play Dom Natale. Greg Schiano, I think, learned from that. I think, he talked about today about the ability to be able to, change, just because you make a decision one day, don't be afraid to change it the next day. I think, Greg Schiano is not going to play around. I think we all know this is a 10-game season. It's going to be a wacky year at that. And, he's really building for the future. Kratch has talked about a lot before. With no concerns about redshirting or burning any eligibility. I wouldn't be surprised to see a guy like Evan Simon, see some time. I think Greg Schiano really wants to spend this season. He wants to win games, of course, which would probably indicate that at least early on he's going to probably play the guy who gives him the best chance to win. But at some point, I think he's probably going to have to experiment a little bit.
Right, and there's going to be, I imagine, a great deal of experimentation. We still don't know what this offense is going to look like. We know what Gleason brings with him. We've seen his systems before, but the fact he was brought here so he can adapt the system to the talent around him. Well, we all know what that means. That means finding a way to get quick passes, to keep the pressure off the quarterback, to find the running game when it's going to be, it's going to be a shaky offensive line. Kratch, what's your overall sense by just putting together the pieces of what you've heard, looking at the roster now, as to what fans can expect from this offense? Will it be better than last year? It's got to be better than last year.
Yeah, so I go back to that famous scene in Apollo 13 where Ed Harris is at mission control and he goes, all right, so what have we got on the spaceship that's good, that works? I think that's what Sean Gleason has to do. And as you said, we haven't seen any practices. When I look at this roster, okay, I know the offensive line is not going to be strong. We've got Pacheco, who's the best player on the offense. You've got a bunch of tight ends and receivers that are unproven. I think you're going to look at spread them out, wide splits on the line, shotgun. You figure Noah Vedral. That's why I think we all kind of pointed towards Vedral maybe having the edge over Art as a starter, just because he has that ability with his legs. And, you kind of run heavy at quick passes. Just try to kind of smoke and mirrors a little bit. I think that's what they have to do. Now, who knows? Maybe you and I will get to East Lansing in a couple of weeks and they'll come out in the wing tee and try to run the ball 3 yards in a cloud of dust every play. I don't think that's going to happen, but you don't know. But my guess is they up-tempo, spread it out, and just try to kind of get angles and spacing and try to zone read their way to some success.
It's interesting, Sarge.
That's a great Apollo 13 reference.
That was good. Yeah, they're gonna some vacuum cleaner parts. Yeah.
Good. I just hope that at one point that Sean Gleason doesn't radio into Greg Schiano and say, Houston, we have a problem. Come on, you see what I did there?
I see
Houston,
it. Houston, that's good. Yeah, that was good line.
Come on. That's the best I got over here, guys.
You're trying. It's a free podcast. Sarge, historically, you have been here for all of Schiano or most of Schiano. The one thing that's striking, while he has a set defensive philosophy, certainly that's been pretty consistent, the offensive philosophy has shifted. So, I mean, we saw Wildcat days. We've seen, obviously Ray Rice, 40 carries a game day. So, I mean, I think that's the biggest mystery about this team, right? I mean, just what kind of system, what kind of offense, and I asked him about it today, and it was cagey Greg. He didn't offer a lot of insight. He said he wanted to turn the ball over less. I mean, he gave you the sort of platitudes that anyone would give about an offense.
Yeah, we have breadcrumbs from or signs from Sean Gleason's past, and I think he's probably going to be some sort of up tempo, play fast. And I think it kind of makes sense. We talked about the offensive line issues, but one way to kind of alleviate that is for the quarterbacks to get the ball out quick. So I would expect them to play fast from that standpoint. He talked about trying to be a physical team. Well, everyone wants to be a physical team, right? I think that's kind of the purpose of football. But then ball control, I think that's going to be like the big thing, because I just remember Greg Schiano back in the day had no tolerance. No coach. It's not like any coach has tolerance for fumbles and interceptions, but Greg Schiano was just famous for it. I mean, he would have posters inside the Hale Center of like players with good ball control, having the ball tucked. So I mean, he really has no patience for fumbling the ball. Yeah, I would think that's going to be a big emphasis for the running backs right now.
Absolutely. Okay, this is the furthest we've gotten into a podcast in months without the words COVID and 19. Congratulations. So far so good with the Big Ten, at least based on no news reports that have leaked about it. Cracks, though, if you're like me and you're watching the NFL that is just rearranging its schedule, it changing games just to accommodate a couple of teams, Patriots, Titans. I mean, what's your level of confidence going into this, now that we're less than 2 weeks away?
Yeah, I think what it's really going to come down to, and obviously I've been talked to a couple experts in the past few days, been working on a story. I think it's really going to come down to is the big distinction of the NFL is still using these daily PCR tests that, they're the gold standard for accuracy, but there's a little bit of a lag time as we're kind of seeing with the results turning around. The big key is going to be, is this Big Ten gamble on rapid antigen testing? And Greg Schiano's talked about it. You test in the morning before you go into meetings. Within an hour, you have a result for everyone on the team. Is that going to be enough, to keep the virus out of the walls of each program, but B, and I think this is going to be the big issue, is it enough to negate the need to contact trace? Because all of these games that we are seeing in college football, and to some extent the NFL, it's not because of the number of positive cases they have. It's because of the fact that, especially with college football, all right, 2 offensive linemen have it. So therefore, the other 15 offensive linemen in the program have to go into quarantine for 2 weeks because they're close contacts. The Big Ten has been saying they believe that this daily testing is going to allow them to avoid that. But I've talked to some experts who say, yes, in theory you could, but at the same time, you are rolling the dice that you're not going to keep a guy out of quarantine who then is going to spread it potentially before he himself tests positive. So I think that's going to be the big key is, can they avoid that sort of contact tracing? Can they avoid that situation where all of a sudden you don't have enough players to safely play a game just because you have so many in isolation rather than testing positive?
Sarge, have anything to add on that one?
Yeah, I think this season's going to be disjointed. It already is nationally. I mean, we've seen a lot of games nationally get either wiped out. Granted, a lot of them have been non-conference, but now we're getting into conference season. But yeah, I think we're seeing what everyone's talked about nationally, a second wave. We're seeing numbers increase in New Jersey. It's not to an alarming point yet, but it's concerning. Sure. It is. It really is. So we're fast approaching this so-called second wave. I think we're going to see, all along, I've said all along that this season, with the Big Ten deciding to come back, it was all about Ohio State and a few other schools that really, really desperately wanted to play because they had great teams, right? So you're going to see a team like Ohio State try to forge ahead and do everything they can, and then you're going to see some other schools that are just going to look at the numbers and there's going to be concern. Whether Rutgers is one of them, they're saying all the right things. I know Greg Schiano is preparing, but yeah, I would. If I was a betting man, I would say that at some point that there are going to be some games in the Big Ten that are going to be canceled.
All right, fellas, let's jump into the Rutgers Insider questions. We launched a new service on the website this week, Rutgers Insider. You get and some great content. Stars, I got to tell you, your story on Miles Nash was excellent. One of the best stories we've done on Rutgers in many, many years. I would even say just an incredible piece about this kid, what he overcome, what he wants to do with his life going forward. You should read that if you haven't, and if you haven't signed up for Rutgers Insider, what are you waiting for? Get to it. We've had a bunch of great questions this week, and some of them were hilarious. I'm going to start with my favorite one. Why didn't the Big Ten Network televise the roster reveal? Jerry DiNardo opening Schiano's vault. Huge ratings! ! I love it. That would be, can you imagine? Did you watch that, Sarge? You're old enough to watch it.
Oh, I did watch that.
That was a huge Geraldo. Huge deal. Huge deal.
Yep.
That would have been
I
good.
would definitely watch the roster reveal.
Sure, open it up and there'd just be a couple of broken bottles on the floor of the vault. That was incredible TV. All right, next question: true or false? Schiano will learn how to mute one of you on a post-game press conference Zoom this year, and if true, who will it be? All right, well, I like this one. What do you think? If you had a chance to hit mute on a Zoom, which one of us is getting muted? Sarge?
Most years, I would lean toward you, Politi.
Yeah.
With all due respect.
I become a smoldering homer. Is what you're trying to say now?
A little softer than normal.
Yeah, okay.
But I'm gonna go outside. I'm gonna say Cratch.
Yeah,
I mean, Cratch has been a little pointed. I mean, go back and read some of his leads. I think Cratch. I mean, and he's made it. I'm not saying anything that he wouldn't agree to hear, but the roster perturbed him a little bit. So.
Yeah.
I think
I love the fact he's calling. Sienna's already calling Cratch on the Zoom call too.
He is, and the way he said it too. I mean, it was tough. So I think Cratch might be the favorite in that category.
How do you feel, Cratch? Agree?
Hey, yeah, it works for me. I mean, look, as I always tell people, we are a conduit between the Rutgers fan base and the Rutgers football program. And the Rutgers fan base has had a lot of questions that have kind of gone unanswered in the past few weeks and months. So just trying to get the answers for our subscribers, NJ.com/text, and elsewhere.
And to follow up on that, to Cratch's point, we've kind of let, we've questioned it, but, Greg Schiano's practice availability has been non-existent, which is certainly not, we're not accustomed to not seeing any practices. Keep in mind, we're not complaining about it because I think you wrote about it the other day, Politi. Every single league, professional league, every single organization, in the country is eliminating access, and understandably so. Major League Baseball doesn't have a locker room. Everyone's going to Zoom calls. Completely understandable. However, that being said, there are questions that need to be asked, and availability to this point, Greg Schiano was available today. He was available last Monday. We still haven't gotten players. The way these Zoom calls, I'll give a little inside baseball. It's going to sound a little bit like a complaint, but we each get one question. I've actually tried to ask two-parters. Cratch asked a two-parter just so we can get some questions in. But the only reason why we do it is because there are a lot of questions to be asked. In a typical press conference setting, you've seen these on YouTube or on any forum that Rutgers will socialize the press conferences. We ask a lot of questions, and this preseason we haven't been able to get a lot of questions asked. So ultimately we're asking the same questions that a lot of Rutgers fans are asking us on the back channels, the same types of questions that Rutgers fans are asking on Twitter, on message boards, and we're just trying to get answers just like everyone else.
Absolutely. Doing the best we can to serve the public. All right, next question. We've had a lot of questions along these lines. What does a successful season look like? How would you measure it? 2 wins, recruiting progress alone, just being more competitive in league games? We know what a failing program and athletic department looks like. That's good. Tell us what we should see that would tell us Schiano 2.0 is off to a promising start beyond the nice coaching hires, et cetera. All right. So I think all of those things he mentions are part of it. I mean, obviously 2 wins, I think you would sign that. You would sign for that in blood right now, given the schedule. If you're competitive against the teams in the division, that's another big part of it. Really, though, for me, it's looking at this roster, feeling that it's better coached, it's younger, and that there are promising players coming through the pipeline. Do you agree, Sarge?
I'll give you one a little bit more, and it might not result in wins and losses. Maybe it will, but their passing has been so abysmal the last couple of years, guys. And they've been down to the bottom of the nation in passing offense, down with the option teams. And it's been 2-3 years running now. If they can, I'm not saying they're going to be in the top half of the country, but if they can get a more – and passing equates to excitement, right? So give the fans something to be optimistic about, as we move forward. Give them some sort of life from an excitement level.
Right. It was dreadful. It's been dreadful to watch. You're absolutely right about that. Cratch, do you agree with the assessment on what success is defined?
I do. I think, and look, I think they can do it, but we'll find out for sure in a couple of weeks. They need to win a game. Yeah. Because especially with, if they go 0-9 in the Big Ten, then you're going into next year with a 30-game Big Ten losing streak. And in that season, if you go winless again in the conference, you are going to pass the Northwestern Dark Ages conference record for losing, consecutive conference losses. That can't happen. You cannot become the worst run in the history of the Big Ten. I don't know if a Rutgers program can it sounds a little extreme. Like it would be really hard to even with Greg and the excitement and the patience the fan base has to overcome topping, the team that is considered maybe the worst in the history of major college football from that era. So you got to get a win, I think, and you have to keep that 2021 recruiting class as intact as possible. I think if you do those 2 things, you're on pretty solid footing moving forward.
Here's two people. This is how deep in the weeds we're going here with this one. 2 different people asked about how many preferred walk-ons that Schiano brought in this season have panned out. I got to defer to you guys. I don't have an answer to that one. Do either one of you get a sense for any players who are preferred walk-ons that are going to have a role in this team or a role on this team in a couple of years?
I think they're optimistic about a bunch of those guys, and I think the big key is, and I've said this before, when you looked at the roster last year, there were not a lot of high schools and parts of the state represented on the roster that you previously saw when, Schiano's first time here, or even under Kyle Flood. I think that was a big key. You need to get the jersey back into New Jersey's, major college football team. And I think it was important for Greg to bring those guys in, because even if they don't play, you have a kid like I believe they have a walk-on kicker from Cranford. Cranford's a very successful high school football program that's, very well coached, always contending for state titles. You want Cranford to have a kid who every time they go to a football game, they can look down on the sideline and see their guy there. That's how you build that pride in the program statewide. You build it up again. So I think there are a couple guys who maybe can contribute down the road, but the bigger issue is going to be getting more ties with the grassroots community in the state.
Absolutely. All right, this is a really good one, Sarge, and I think you can address it well. I've seen Greg Schiano more times on local media outlets in less than a year than I saw Chris Ash during his entire reign. Was that just another missed rugby tackle? Love it. Love that line. On his part, or a product of Greg Schiano's personality and vision? And I really think it is the latter. Greg understands that he's got one thing to sell at a place like Rutgers, and that's the head coach himself. And you remember back in the glory days, Sarge, if he had a weekend off or if he had a Thursday night game and there was a chance to get on a helicopter and fly up to Bristol and be on that set, just for some FaceTime, to show that he's an expert. He's sitting up there talking about college football. He did it. And I'm surprised he hasn't had as much as that yet. But then again, it's been such an unusual time. It's a little harder. Your thoughts?
That is first off, that's a great insider question. It's just a really, really good Rutgers insider question. Second off, you're 100% right. And I think it stems from Greg just being a, New York City area guy, growing up in it. And I think, he probably arrived here, looked at the media landscape and, back in the day, he would have the normal beat guys, right? The Gannett crew, the couple guys from the Ledger, some people from Trentonian, on and on and on. So there would probably be 6 or 7 daily beat people, in a given week. And then they would really hope, at least once or twice a week, they would get some of the New York papers, maybe the Philadelphia newspaper, and whenever they would come out, Greg would always be able to talk to them about the local guys, like whether, if he was talking to Hoops Weiss from the Daily News, he would make a big point to talk about, some of the New York guys on the roster. If he was talking to the guys from the Philadelphia Inquirer, we'd be talking about the South Jersey and the Philadelphia guys. So Greg just knows the media landscape. Him going on Fox 5 last night and a few of the others, I think he understands that the New York market, as much as 2020 and maybe typical recruits aren't watching that per se, there are coaches, there are still a segment of people who might catch it and be intrigued by it. Greg is trying to control his own media from that standpoint, trying to get his own message out there as much as he can. It's smart. I'm not surprised by it, but it's one of the things that he's really, really good at.
Yep, and that's a big part of why they hired him. The programmatic stuff beyond coaching. All right, here's a good one that I think you should field. Which team will put more talent on the field in the Big Ten opener, Sparty or the Fighting Schianos? Is it gotten to the point where we can say that Rutgers is equalizing talent level with a program that's clearly going in the wrong direction the last few years in Michigan State?
I don't think we're there yet, but we're probably getting close. Michigan State did not recruit terribly well toward the end of the Mark D'Antonio era, and obviously they're having some success, especially in New Jersey early on with Mel Tucker. But at the same time, too, I'm kind of skeptical about the long-term outlook for Michigan State with Mel Tucker. It just seems to me that it was kind of a weird situation with the weird timing with D'Antonio leaving so late in the game. And then obviously when you couldn't get pry Luke Fickell loose from Cincinnati, you bring a guy in Mel Tucker who didn't have much success at Colorado before he bolted there. So I'm skeptical about if this is gonna be anything more than kind of the sound and fury that we saw at Maryland at the beginning of the DJ Durkin era before things. Obviously, you hope that doesn't go as bad at Michigan State as it did at Maryland. But I don't think Rutgers is there yet. But I think in a year or two, yes, they might have more talent than Michigan State.
All right, another question from a Steve P, which I like, and it goes back to the quarterbacks. And I know we addressed this a little bit, but it is still a good point. When you have, how does Schiano plan to use Art as quarterback? He's obviously not an RPO type quarterback. So if the new offense is going to lean in that direction, where does that leave Art? And it's a great point because I really don't think, we talked about it a little earlier in the podcast that this is going to be a situation where you're going to be able to make a 5 to 7 step drop back against these pass rushers with this offensive line and have good success. Scratch, does that change your opinion of the quarterback race? Is it not just a talent thing, but it's just a necessity thing? Well, why Art might not be the guy?
I think that definitely will play a role, in the whole process. I will say this. Art is not, Art is not like a dual threat quarterback as you think about it conventionally. I do think he can move a little bit more than he's given credit for, and I think that there is a way. So the way I would say is if Sean Gleason is as good of an offensive coordinator as we believe he is, as Greg Schiano clearly believes he is, he'll find a way to run his offense with Art as the quarterback and make Art successful. I do think there are things they can do, maybe not as much of a quarterback run threat as it would be with Vedral or Langan, but I think, I know they've struggled the last 2 weeks, but I go back to, I watched a lot of the Mississippi State LSU game. The ability Mike Leach has for his quarterback to take a snap and just have guys wide open with no one within a mile of them, that's all scheme. And I think if Rutgers can create a system where they can successfully scheme guys open quickly and Art has to make, just easy, quick throws, he could kind of fit a Gleason offense.
He might, but Sarge, so many turnovers though. I mean, that was, we forget that when he was out there, he made a lot of bad decisions.
He got better last year, in the limited time early on in the year with that. And Cratch is right. I mean, this is a guy who is, deceptively, is faster than a lot of people probably give him credit for. I think it's going to be, we're going to see an offense when Greg Schiano says he wants a fast-moving, fast-paced offense. He's talking about getting the ball out quickly, to be clear. So those dump-off hitch passes right away, those are going to be the things that we're going to see in this offense. I think the quarterback, and look, I've seen a lot of tape. Go back to a couple months ago when he first arrived. James Cratch did a great, video, of a breakdown of Noah Vedral. And, just how you might potentially fit this offense. Go back and look at it. Certainly there's a lot from his Nebraska days that indicate that he's a good fit for it. I'm just saying, just don't discount Sikowski from the standpoint that, he's quote unquote not the typical dual threat. He ran it in high school. He ran it in IMG. He got better in the limited times that we saw him last year before he opted to redshirt. I would not discount him from the competition.
All right, one more. This one really goes at the heart of things here in fall 2020. Do we think Rutgers gets out to a better start this season than both teams that play at MetLife Stadium? Whew, man, it's tough. I tell you, Sundays are tough in this house watching these football games. 0-5 Jets, 0-5 Giants. Somebody asked me what I thought the combined record would be of Jets, Giants, and Rutgers this year. I think the Giants probably will win 3 or 4 games. The Jets aren't going to win a game. And if I put 1 or 2 on Rutgers, that means we could be like, if doing the math in my head, that's 32 plus 9, 41. So you could be like 3-38 this year. What do you think?
Well, I think I picked him to beat Michigan State in the opener, so I would say yes. I don't know if I'm going to stick with that, but yeah, I will stick with that. Yes, I do think that they'll start 1-0, which is better than 0-5.
1-0 this week. Wow, I haven't used that one in a while. It's been a long time. All right, fellas, anything else? You want to do a quick basketball segment? There was some news in that program, scheduling-wise, depth-wise, Cratch.
Yes, obviously, Kayla McConnell out for the season. A tough blow, I think. I mean, I don't think it's necessarily a loss that you sit there and say, okay, this team is now not going to be able to make the NCAA tournament because of it, but still, he's a guy who was, good defensive player, very versatile, gave him a lot of quality minutes, played a lot last year when Gio was injured, so that's a tough thing for them. Also tough to kind of lose that, Jimmy V game with Baylor. I know a lot of fans were excited about that, but when you think about it, it just never really made sense for Rutgers to take the team to Orlando and to be stuck there for a few days in a kind of an ESPN zone testing system where they could play the game. So I think you look for Rutgers to, with the exception of the Big Ten ACC game, to kind of play a local non-conference schedule, which is what they should have been doing, forever anyway. Obviously, Baylor MSG would have been a little bit different. Hopefully they keep the Seton Hall game. I know there's a desire on both sides, but I think the longer we go with the Big East and the Big Ten not setting a conference schedule, and it seems like Seton Hall is a little bit more open to kind of these far-flung bubble-type setups in the non-conference, you kind of have to wonder maybe that game won't happen this year. But I will say this. If you can't play Seton Hall, I know people are going to give me crap for this, you got to play Princeton.
Wow. Yeah, no, I agree with you there. And it's amazing. I will say that the level of preseason and hype about this team is extraordinary. I mean, I'm looking at social media. There was a a Final Four dark horse. I mean, remember, this team still, has not. They would have made the tournament last year. They still have to do it, and replicating what happened last year without the fan advantage in the rack is going to be tough, Sarge.
Absolutely. The McConnell injury. I mean, they do have a lot of depth. But that's going to be one of those things where it's hard to weigh that. Steve Peichel plays. He's such a great defensive factor. You'd be a little concerned about it. Again, I'm just looking forward to actually talking about basketball. I had a few questions you just posed to me, like at a party I went to last week. Very, very limited amount of people, by the way. And it was outdoors, just for the record.
Wow. Did you wear a mask during this party?
It was family. So,
family?
But still, yeah, I socially distanced for sure.
Okay.
But I got more questions about basketball than football, believe it or not. So I think we've come a long way. And Dave White was not there, so you can't say it was Dave White.
Oh, good. Beautiful. Yeah.
But, yeah, I think there's just general excitement. The one thing is I still have no, optimism whether or not they're going to be able to actually allow fans in, but just to be able to potentially have college basketball back, I'm looking forward to it.
Dave White tried to get me to follow the court club, so I followed the touchdown club instead. I don't know if he's noticed that yet, but that was my little Twitter moment there last week. Made myself laugh at least.
Guys, just to go back to what we talked about with the Big Ten playing the season, I just popped across my timeline on Twitter. Report is that Missouri Vanderbilt, first SEC game going to be postponed. It sounds like Vanderbilt doesn't have enough, healthy bodies to play a game this coming week. And I will say this, as an SEC grad, if there's a school on the country that's going to say, we're done, we're shutting this down, it's Vanderbilt. So watch that. That could be the first kind of Power 5 school that says, no more football this fall, potentially.
All right. Well, hopefully this time next week we'll be back talking. We'll preview a game. Can you imagine?
I just want to close one thing because we talked about the roster, right? And it's not really. I mean, fans really care about it. So I'm going to just in numbers, right? I mean, Cratch has talked about this before in the past too. So a couple things from the roster that kind of stood out to me. First, 0. Seeing the number 0 on the roster. Noah Vidral gets to wear that from the offensive standpoint. Christian Izzian, who I expect to lock down one of the defensive back spots, is also wearing 0. Johnny Langan, I know that was his high school number, 21. Steve, Cratch as well. 2 of the greatest Rutgers players in school history have worn a number 21. Can you name them?
McCourty?
Yes, that's one. Well, which one? Yeah, there's 2 McCourtys.
Jason, I believe?
Nope, Devin.
No, crap. Okay. Who else went 21?
And who's the other 21? He's an offensive player. And I'll give you this hint.
J.J. Jennings?
He's an offensive player, and he played quarterback.
He played quarterback? God, you stumped me on that one. I don't know.
Is it Frank Burns?
It's Frank Burns.
Oh,
look at Cratch.
Cratch pulling it out.
Frank Burns wore 21 for the majority of his career. There are a lot of photos online of him wearing 61, 85, a few other numbers, but he would only do that during like media day photos, but he wore 21. So if Johnny Langan ends up having a big year, he'll look like Frank Burns.
Wow.
Also, I would say, to go back to roster numbers, since we're hitting on that, in terms of heights and weights, it's always a little bit tough to compare from year over year. I mean, it's not like the Middlesex County Weights and Measures Department's coming out to certify the roster. Zakuto Igwinogu, 22-pound gain since last year. And he put a photo of himself on Twitter, and it looks like Jay Butler's strength and conditioning program has been very good to him.
Nice. That's going to be fascinating. Again, when you can't eyeball these things, that the first time we're standing out there in East Lansing looking at the players in the field, it's going to be interesting to see how they all look. Let's hope we get there, Cratch. All right, that's it for this week. Steve Politi, James Cratch, Keith Sargent signing off. We'll be back next week to preview a football game. Thanks for listening.
Acast powers some of the world's best podcasts. Here's a show we recommend.
Hey sports fans, I'm Cooper Searles.
And I'm all-star pitcher Ross Stripling. I may have one of the slower fastballs in the league, but I definitely have one of the better podcasts.
Our motto is big swings only. That's why we've had guys like CJ McCollum, Clayton Kershaw, Mike Evans, and Kirk Herbstreit.
So check out the podcast where athletes go to talk sports, the Big Swing Podcast. Find us every Wednesday on Apple Pod, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Acast recommends.